view whatsoever, except to say that let's just wait
Oh,
for the meeting to
either
start.
way.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right, thank you.
And so we're on page 18.
And I'm sorry, Ms. September. Did a lot of time lapse between the end of the briefing and the actual meeting, with the result that if he had any issues with what you had said, he could have, there was time for him to raise those issues with regard to the briefing?
Indeed, Chair. I think that in my affidavit, I actually mentioned that we waited for a very long time
Yes.
for the representatives of Jet Airways to arrive for
Yes.
the meeting.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you.
And on that point of waiting, how long did you wait for the Jet Airways representative to arrive?
Again, because obviously I was not watching the time accurately, but it was a good over 2 hours, in my view, that we waited for them to arrive. And during that period of waiting and trying to understand why we were waiting for so long, we then overheard Mr. Mahlangu saying the Jet Airways representatives were actually on their way, flying from Cape Town to Johannesburg on their private jet.
And when you say you waited for over 2 hours, would that be from the time you arrived or the time after you had finished the briefing of the minister? Or
For
the
me,
difference
Chair,
might not be much?
Yeah, for me, Chair, I count the 2 hours from the time at which we expected the meeting to start
Yes.
to when it actually started.
Yes. What was the time that you had been told the meeting would start?
I can't recall.
You can't recall,
yes.
yes. But obviously probably you arrived on time.
Indeed, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
In your experience, Ms. Mzimela, and your particular engagements with ministries over the years, was it normal for a minister's office to wait that long for anyone to attend a meeting with him or her?
So, Chair, the reason why I actually remember that we waited for so long is because for me, it seemed very unusual that we were waiting for so long for people to arrive, especially because it also had a direct impact even on my diary, based on what we had been, well, the time that had been stipulated for the meeting. And I had worked out that I would probably be done and able to take a subsequent meeting on my return to the office. And that's why, despite it being so many years ago, I recall, that at that point in time, for me, I was quite surprised that we were waiting as long as we did for these individuals to arrive. And indeed, in particular reference to say that even for the minister to accommodate such a long wait.
Well, prior to your coming to the meeting, what was your understanding of who would form part of this meeting?
So, Chair, as I recall, we had no idea that there would be external individuals. Our understanding is that we were meeting with the minister in order to discuss the Johannesburg-Mumbai route.
Yes.
Yes.
When you arrived, the minister was there, and who else was there apart from Mr. Stolle that came with you?
When we arrived, the minister was there, the minister's advisor was there, and at the point at which we then started the meeting...
The advisor being Mr. Mahlangu.
That's Mr. Mahlangu.
Yeah, do you remember his name? Or not really?
Siyabonga Mahlangu.
Siyabonga Mahlangu.
Yes, it's
okay.
Mr. Siyabonga Mahlangu.
All right, yes.
Yes. So Mr. Siyabonga Mahlangu was also, present, and there were other officials of DPE that were present.
Of the department?
Of the department, yes. So by the time we go into the meeting, I do actually share that for the ones that I actually remember quite specifically being present at the meeting is the minister, it is the deputy minister at the time, Mr. Ben Martins, it is Mr. Siyabonga Mahlangu, myself, and Mr. Sizakele Mzimela.
And that is when the meeting actually got to start?
Yes.
Yes, those were the people who were present.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Did you receive any phone call during your wait, Ms. Mzimela?
Yeah, so while we were waiting for the meeting to start, I then get a phone call from the office. And the phone call is from Miss Advocate Kutsia, who is a little bit perturbed.
You want to to also give us her name? Is it
Oh.
Susan, Miss Susan?
Okay. I received a call from Advocate Sandra.
Yeah,
Kutsia.
okay.
Just for the record, Chair, it's Sandra Julia Hester Kutsia.
Yes, thank you.
And who at the time was employed at SAA as the head of legal, the head of the legal department. So she calls me that there is a gentleman who is supposedly in possession of an agreement, and he is demanding that this agreement be signed. And this agreement pertains to SAA agreeing to terminate their operation on the Mumbai Route. Then this actually surprised me, and I said, I'm a bit confused as to what she's talking about. But because we're still waiting for the meeting to start, I said, look, I'm really confused. The meeting hasn't started. I have already briefed, or myself and Mr. Sitole have already briefed the minister. So this is news to me. So my simple suggestion to her was that, look, try and find a way to stall, because I'm really confused. And maybe after this meeting, I'll have a better sense as to what's going on and why would this gentleman be under the impression that there is an agreement that SAA should be signing to confirm that they would be terminating the route.
And from which company was this particular gentleman?
He was from Jet Airways. He was a Jet Airways representative.
What was the significance about the call that you received?
Well, let's just get his name if you were told. At that stage, you were not told who the person was, the name
Unfortunately, I was not told
Okay.
what was the name of the gentleman,
Okay.
except for him being a representative of Jet Airways.
was. Okay.
And Chair, the affidavit of Advocate Kutsia, which appears under tab 2.
The one we saw in the morning.
Yes,
Yeah.
Chair. At page 220, the version of events is corroborated at paragraphs 17 and 18, as indicated by this witness. With your leave, I'm happy to read that part into the record.
No,
If so
it's not necessary. Yeah, just continue.
What was the significance of the call that you received from Advocate Kutsia, and particularly the timing of the call, in your view?
As already indicated, Chair, I found it very strange that there is a Jet Airways representative that's presenting a document or trying to present a document to SAA to sign, and this is the time when, if the meeting had started, obviously the meeting would have ended possibly at that point in time at which he is putting a call through to SAA to say, I have an agreement that needs to be signed.
But also even that would have been quite strange, even if an agreement had been reached in the discussions at the meeting, for one of the parties to have an agreement that's been typed and that's ready to be signed.
That is correct, Chair.
But before we move forward, can I ask whether during the time when you were waiting before the meeting could start, and after you had briefed the minister, whether you at any stage sought to find out why are we being made to wait so long, or anything to that effect, either from the minister or from his staff?
I do recall that Mr. Sitole did actually ask the question to say, how long are we still going to be waiting? Because obviously he also had meetings that were planned. And we were told, no, the representatives of Jet Airways that we're waiting for are on their way and they'll be there shortly. And that's the only response that we actually received.
Were you surprised that suddenly there were to be other people attending the meeting that you had not been told about?
Yes, we were actually surprised in that in coming to the meeting, we didn't know that there were going to be other people joining the
Yes.
meeting.
Yes.
But we already knew that there would be people coming through, because after the briefing with the minister did pose the question to say, do we know, to his team, so how long are these gentlemen still going to be before they arrive?
Oh, but that was the first time you got an indication that there would be other people coming.
No.
Or you had
Chair, I
already?
think that when we got, to DPE, and we were then, well, the first thing was asked to brief the minister. But by the time we walked in to brief the minister, there was already an indication that this meeting was not just going to be between ourselves and the minister, but there were other individuals that were going to be joining us. Hence, the pre-briefing and not going straight into the meeting with the
Yes,
minister.
okay. And the minister, during that period of waiting, was the minister away from where you were and your team and everybody was in his office, or was everyone just waiting where the meeting was supposed to take place?
The meeting, we briefed him in his office, and then once we had concluded the briefing, went back into the boardroom that was going to be utilized for the meeting, and the minister remained in his office.
And when you were in the boardroom, were his staff with you or not really?
His staff were there, in and out,
Yeah.
because there had been an expectation that the meeting would already have started or be starting at that point in time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And we are now on page 19 from paragraph 46 of the bundle.
So,
Please take us through the meeting on the arrival of the Jet Airways representative.
okay. So eventually the Jet Airways representatives arrived, and the team was actually, led by Mr. Goya, who I've already actually mentioned already as Executive Chair and CEO of Jet Airways. And I do recall that there was definitely one other, representative. There may have been more than, one at that meeting. And we all then convened into the meeting, and as indicated, present at the meeting is Mr. Sitole and myself, the minister, the deputy minister, Ben Martins, Mr. Mahlangu, and other DPE representatives also present in the meeting. Then the meeting actually starts, and Mr. Goyal commences the meeting by spending a lot of time talking about himself, and how important he is, and all of the things, that he has actually done, in aviation. So that's the first time, when he gets a little bit annoyed with me, because I respond, because it's going on, and I say, we do know you, and I know you professionally, because we are part of the same sort of aviation committees or forums. He then goes on to basically raise the issue that he's come to discuss.
But just before you get to that, everybody is at the boardroom now and the meeting is about to start.
Yes.
Who is chairing the meeting? Who was chairing the meeting?
So the chair of the meeting is then Mr. Gigiba.
Okay, was he the one to start in the normal way a meeting would start? The purpose of this meeting is to discuss this issue. We have so and so and so and so. Mr. Goyal, will you start or something like that?
Indeed, Chair. As chair of the meeting, he does obviously welcome all the people present at the meeting and indicates that there has been a request to have the discussion and that the meeting is to discuss the Johannesburg-Mumbai route, at which point he then hands over
To Mr. Goyal.
to Mr. Goyal.
Okay.
So
thank
this
you.
is where then he takes over
Yes, okay.
in
you may
beginning
continue.
to introduce himself.
Yes, okay.
And his organization.
Okay, then you may continue.
Yes. He then actually continues. He speaks faster than I do. So he then continues to then talk specifically about the agenda item of the day, which is the Mumbai Route, and indicates his unhappiness about the delay in the decision being taken. And in his view, again, everyone is wasting time, in that SAA should already have closed off this route, because his airline is better placed to be serving the Johannesburg-Mumbai route, and he's quite surprised that we're just wasting time and not getting off the route. And he would really like to actually suggest that we do so and do so, as quickly as possible and, stop wasting time. At that point, I then respond because...
Before you responded, did this come across like a demand as opposed to a request or proposal that you close off this route? How did it come across?
To me, I say, as far as I was concerned, he was using a very instructive tone, as if actually, maybe the way, and I hope not all CEOs speak to their excos like that, but, he's there, he's telling us this is what should be happening, we're wasting time, can we actually just move on and do what needs to be done?
Okay, yeah, continue.
And because he then makes the point that as far as is concerned anyway, this decision was long made. And the problem is more with this current management that is refusing to implement a decision that's already been taken. It is at this point at which I interject to actually ask the question to say, I am not aware of any decision that had already been made prior to that date. And if he feels so strongly that a decision had been taken and a commitment made to them as Jet Airways, then could he at least disclose who had given him that assurance that SAA would be terminating the route? It is at this point that he then says it was Mr. Smythe. And to some extent, I probably could understand his frustration, because part of his frustration was that now they have, on the basis of this commitment that was made, they have now gone and they are like, started operating services, to South Africa. So he's very frustrated at this point in time because things have not gone according to plan, according to him.
So Ms. Mzimela, is he then allowed to continue and make these comments, statements, and demands uninterrupted?
Indeed he is, which I actually found quite strange as well, because now it also ends up being like, he says, the only two people really talking are myself and he, but he's basically, in a way, trying to get me to say, shut up and let's get on with this discussion, this is what you actually should be doing. And I was quite surprised, because maybe it would have been different if it was myself and he, on our own, and he decides to speak to me in that manner. But in my experience, with a minister and a deputy minister sitting in the room, and this is a foreigner in our country, and he comes and he takes that type of tone in a meeting and is allowed to actually carry on and speak in that manner, I found that to be disturbing, to say the least. And he does this until, and I can only speculate, but until deputy minister gets to a point where, in my view, he came across as someone who was now upset. Because obviously we're waiting for the chairperson, who's the minister, to step in. He doesn't intervene until, it is actually Deputy Minister then Martins who intervenes and says, no, please, stop right there. We have no problem, we're all sitting here to try and listen to what your issues are and to try and find a way to assist, if there is a way of assisting, but please be careful about the way in which you speak to us, and you cannot be talking to us as if you're giving us instructions in our own country.
Yes, just continue in terms of giving us a full picture of the meeting.
Yes. So at that stage, Mr. Goyal then apologized.
Before Mr. Ben Martins intervened, you had said something in response, other than saying, who gave you the impression that a decision had been taken already? Please tell us. And he told you. Apart from that, was there anything else of any significance you had raised or not really?
I would have used the opportunity to once again raise the issue that I will re-emphasize what I had shared with the minister, which is we are not opposed to finding a workable partnership. But as far as I'm concerned, what they are placing on the table is not something that we would ever consider. And hence I went back to ask, who had actually confirmed that we're going to close the route. Because he kept on emphasizing that SAA needed to get off the route. And I said, that's not part of the discussion. We're not aligned to that discussion. Whatever discussions that we continue to have with Jet Airways are purely on a code share which we think should be mutually beneficial to both parties. But they are stuck on this issue of us not doing what they expected us to do, which is to get off the route completely. By us, sorry, Chair, I mean SAA.
At that stage, did you have an understanding of how long before this meeting this decision that he said had been taken to his knowledge? Did he give an indication of, was it a decision of a few weeks ago, a few days, or is that something that did not emerge?
Based on what you shared at the meeting, Chair, he actually indicated that even prior to them, as Jet Airways, commencing the route to Johannesburg, it was on the basis that SAA had already confirmed to them that they would be getting off the route.
Well,
So
they were already operating between Joburg and Mumbai. Or
Yeah.
they'd always, for a long time, they had been operating the route. They just wanted SAA out of the way.
No, Chair. So as at this date, when this meeting now takes place, Jet Airways has now commenced with frequencies to South Africa.
On the strength of this decision he's talking about, as you understood the position,
Indeed, according to him, on
according
the
to him.
strength of
Yeah,
that.
okay. Okay.
But you will recall that when I started off, I said, at the point at which we were also making the recommendation to the board to say we shall not be closing that route, we were the sole, SAA was the sole operator on the route. So then they commence operations into South Africa, and according to him, they do that on the basis that there is a commitment that was made to them that SAA would get off the route.
Yeah, okay, thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you.
Sorry. Then he apologizes when a deputy minister at that time
Intervened.
intervenes. He then apologizes, and his tone is slightly different in terms of obviously still raising the issues that he's disappointed, that we're not making progress, and quite frustrated because they really think that they could be good partners, to SAA. And at the moment, he feels like we are not moving forward fast enough in terms of trying to finalize or formalize a partnership. That, Chair, was the gist of the meeting until Mr. Gigaba, who was basically silent right through the exchange, even when there was an exchange between myself, and Mr. Goyal, even when Mr. Ben Martins actually intervenes, he had not said anything at that point in time.
What was Mr. Goyal's reaction to you saying the issue of SAA closing the route is out of the question? That's not what we are here to talk about. We are here to talk about cooperation and code sharing. What was his reaction to that?
This is the time at which we are still insisting that you are wasting time. Get off, the route, because this is, and so that exchange happens as well prior to Mr. Ben Martins. In fact, it probably was also the reason why Mr. Ben Martins also then intervenes to say, no, you can't really be telling us what to do.
Well, I just want to say it's quite important that I get as full a picture of the mood and the atmosphere as possible of that meeting and the way he was talking, because I think I remember from your affidavit that you got upset. So I'm just saying, to the extent that you might not have described it as fully as you think you are able to, feel free to do so, because it's important that I get a full picture. But if you are satisfied that the way you have described it is sufficient, it's okay.
No, Chair, I am actually satisfied with what I've said today. As I said, I wanted to actually conclude or say in terms of how the meeting then concluded is that Mr. Gigaba, his contribution to the meeting is to then request that as a matter of urgency, we should try and meet as SAA and Jet Airways to try and work through a solution or finding a solution to the partnership or building a partnership.
Also, he in effect suggests that the discussion between SA and Jet Airways should be continued, but he says to find a way to have some kind of partnership.
Indeed, and he says it is urgent. So he's basically, as the minister, instructing us, to hold that meeting as quickly as possible, and with Jet Airways, in order to have this discussion further. But he's not indicating at that point in time whether he agrees with our position or agrees with the Jet Airways position.
Yes.
All he's saying is essentially, can you actually ensure that there is an urgent meeting that is actually held between the representatives of the two airlines in order to find, to finalize the partnership.
I know, because you have said that you were not there to discuss a possible closure of the Mumbai Route, and from what you said, Mr. Goyal wasn't there to discuss anything else. He wanted implementation of what he believed was a decision that had been taken.
Yes.
But I just want to find out whether during that meeting there was any discussion of the merits and demerits of any of the two positions.
Chair, there wasn't a detailed discussion except for my response back to Mr. Goyal to say we have always indicated that we are happy to partner with them on a co-share basis that is mutually beneficial to the airlines, but what we're clear about is that we have no intentions of actually close or pulling off the route completely, because it does not make sense to SAA.
And how long do you think this meeting took place from the time it started after Mr. Goyal had arrived to the end, more or less?
If I exclude his introduction, which was probably about 15 minutes, probably about 30 minutes, so in total about 45 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mzimela, is it correct for us to understand that Minister Malusi Gigaba's involvement in this meeting was but limited to the introduction at the outset of the meeting, and his request
Closing
to the
remarks.
parties at the end? Sorry?
I'm saying his introduction and closing remarks.
Yes, Chair. His introduction and closing remarks. Is that the extent of his contribution towards the meeting?
That is correct, Chair.
Now, how, in your view, did Minister Gigaba's silence possibly enable the meeting discussions and the impression that was left at the end of the meeting?
Just to be clear, the impression on me, left with me.
Yes, in your view, you attended the meeting. Minister Gigaba's engagement was at the outset, it was at the closure. There was nothing said in between, despite the vigorous engagements, debates, attacks, so to speak, as you've indicated, that was launched against SAA with the aid of Minister Ben Martin.
Maybe attack might not be accurate, but I think the question is, what did you make of the fact that the minister was so silent during this meeting for most of the time, other than introducing everybody or the introductory remarks at the beginning of the meeting and the suggestion he made at the end of the meeting that Jet Airways and SA should continue discussions?
Chair, I think for me it was disappointing because Minister sitting there is a shareholder representative of the entity, and at the very least, in my opinion, he should probably have used the opportunity to re-emphasize, or in his own words, support what I had presented to him, which is we're happy to talk about cooperation, but it's got to be on the basis of it being beneficial to SAA.
I guess especially because you had briefed him on these issues and he didn't seem to have, he didn't raise any problems with the approach that you representing management were taking.
Indeed, Chair.
Would Minister Gigaba's silence have enabled then further discussions on the very strong proposals that Jet Airways were adamant to insist on?
I believe that that is the case, Chair, because had Jet Airways also heard the same message from the shareholder representative, they would not have continued, trying to find a polite way, they would have not continued to try and still push for the closure of the
Yes.
route. I
Yeah.
think for me, it would have been an opportunity for them to actually understand that we're all speaking with one voice and that the only issue that we are interested in having a discussion with them on is a partnership as it relates to a code share which will benefit us, as I said, with looking at the beyond points, because at that point, they're already operating to South Africa. We can't stop them. There is no problem with us actually code sharing with them. There is value for us to get beyond points from them out of Mumbai, and likewise, we were happy to provide what we thought was equivalent benefit to them out of Johannesburg.
Yes.
Following this meeting, is it correct that a follow-up meeting was held on the 24th of January 2011?
Yes, a meeting was held, and I attended the first part of the meeting, just to make sure, because as the only executive that had been present at the meeting with the minister, I thought it was actually important to be part of that meeting initially, where now it's Jet Airways representatives and SAA, in the absence of Mr. Goyal, so to actually then again confirm that the idea is to continue to work, to speak to each other, to try and find a partnership or to finalize a partnership that is mutually beneficial to all parties. I then leave and continue with the rest of my work, but then the team, because at that point it's the head of commercial now, who is now running with the process, rightfully so, and the alliance, the team that handled alliance arrangements. But the feedback was that nothing really came out of that meeting.
And before we hear about the feedback, in terms of the composition of that meeting, do you know how it was composed? Who attended? In terms of names?
Okay. Chair, I mean, from my side, I can confirm that the head of commercial at that point in time was Mr. Tienas Potgieter, and he would have attended the meeting with his team from the alliance department. I can't quite recall.
You might not recall the
Yes.
names of the teams. And from Jet Airways side, do you know? Mr. Goyal wasn't there.
Yes, what I can confirm is that Mr. Goyal was not there, but he had his
Other people.
or representatives.
Okay, all right. And what was the feedback to you on the meeting?
The feedback was that essentially they had not been able to make progress because Jet Airways was still stuck on trying to get SAA to move off the route.
So in terms of the report that was made to you, was the position basically exactly the same as it was at the meeting which you had attended, where Jet Airways was saying, get off the route, and you were saying, we're not getting off the route, but if you want to talk code sharing, we can talk.
That is correct, Chair.
Okay.
So,
The minister wasn't in that meeting?
No.
No, okay.
This is a meeting now that takes place at SAA.
Okay.
so this meeting similarly concludes on the basis that the parties cannot reach consensus. Is that right?
That's correct.
Just as a matter of interest, how did the performance of SAA and Jet Airways relative to this route compare to each other, if they could compare at all?
Well, we would not have, definitely would not have privy to their performance
How they
statistics,
performed,
like
yeah.
the financials, I mean, in terms of how they're actually performing. But what we would know is that they were hurting. And when I say hurting, because it was too much, they had gone in and put in too much frequency into the market, and they were not able to fill those aircraft. So just understanding the airline industry and what you would normally require, sort of like an average load factor, we understood that they would be hurting.
Let's go back to the time between the meeting that you attended with the minister and the Jet Airways and the second meeting which you didn't attend. In between, did you confront Mr. Smythe and say, I heard from Mr. Goyal that you had told him that a decision had been taken by SAA that it would close down the Mumbai Route. Is that true? And tell me, how did that come about? What's going on?
Indeed, I did, Chair, and it would probably have been on the very day when I got back to the office, to have actually called him and said, this is the situation that I found myself in the meeting, where Mr. Goyal actually said the following, and he denied it. He said he had never, yes, he said he had never made any commitment to terminate the route, except for what they had put forward as a team, as a recommendation to pull off the route. But he said he never made a personal commitment to Mr. Goyal or provided them with confirmation that SAA would be terminating the route.
Did he indicate whether he had shared the recommendation with Mr. Goyal or with anybody from Jet Airways? In other words, had he told either Mr. Goyal or anybody from Jet Airways that he would be making a recommendation to the board that the route be closed down?
No, Chair, he didn't actually indicate that at all. I mean, at that point, he was like denying, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Knowledge of.
On page 21, at paragraph 54, you talk about a memorandum that you prepared to the DG on the 11th of April 2011. Can you please explain the purpose of this memorandum to the Chair?
The purpose of the memorandum to the DG was to actually provide him with an update on where we were with the discussions with Jet Airways. As the person that I liaised with at DPE, in order for him to provide further feedback to the minister. And I indicated in that memorandum that we had still not found a workable solution between ourselves and Jet Airways.
To that end, can I ask you to turn to page 116, please?
What's the page number?
116.
Okay.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
What it is a presentation that we would have actually put together as the SAA management team to not just say we're not prepared, or rather to set out the basis on which we were happy to finalize a partnership with Jet Airways. So in terms of this presentation, we talk about the various options, and we say we are happy to conclude a co-chair relationship with them, but it would only be on the basis that they reduce the frequency that they're already operating in the marketplace, so that it actually makes sense, because obviously we're looking at the numbers now from an SAA perspective in terms of what would be the benefit to us. So those are the proposals that we then table as well to the DG as part of the letter that I sent to him as an update, in order to demonstrate that we've applied our minds as to if we are going to proceed, it will have to actually proceed on the following basis.
And so too, can I then ask you to read the conclusions that appear on page 125?
The conclusion is that SA's connecting traffic is considerable and SA is not in a position to adjust its schedule as there is a high risk of losing connecting traffic from and beyond Johannesburg. That SAA remains open to a potential partnership with Jet Airways under the right conditions.
Thank you. And a few pages before that, I ought to have taken you here first. On page 113, there appears a memorandum that's written by yourself. Oh, let me wait for you first. 113. There appears to be a memorandum from yourself to the Director General for the Department of Public Enterprises, Mr. Chediso Matona, and it's dated 11 April 2011. Is this the memorandum that you were referring to earlier?
That is correct, Chair.
Thank you. It is noted on the next page, though, at page 114, that it's not signed. Do I ever confirm this to be your memorandum?
That's correct.
So, on 11 April 2011, you write a memorandum which details and gives an account on SAA's position in relation to the Mumbai Route, and that's preceded by a meeting you had in January on the route. But 3 days later, on the 14th of April 2011, is it correct that you get summons to Cape Town again?
That is correct. So the chairperson once again gets a call indicating that in less than 24 hours, we should make ourselves available for a meeting with the minister in Cape Town. Unfortunately, once again, Ms. Carolus, I think she was actually had a planned trip at that time, is unable to attend the meeting. She then requested Mr. Teddy Daka to accompany me.
Mr.?
Teddy Daka.
Yes.
She requests Mr. Teddy Daka to accompany me to the meeting in Cape Town.
You get this call around when in April? A few days before the date for the meeting, or what?
Yes, it was 24 hours before. So
Oh.
within 24 hours, we needed to.
So
In fact, I think we got the call the previous afternoon, and we had to be in Cape Town the following day.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
It was very short notice, to such an extent that whilst Mr. Teddy Daka initially was not going to be able to even accompany me to the meeting because he had a young daughter at that time that he was taking responsibility for his daughter at that point in time, and he indicated that he didn't have anybody to babysit the little girl, and therefore he would be unable to travel with us at very short notice. In order to even accommodate him attending the meeting with me, we even made arrangements to say we will find somebody to babysit his daughter when we get to Cape Town, because it was important always, again, from a governance perspective, that this was a request that had been put to the board. The chairperson felt that Mr. Daka was best placed to be the one to accompany me, and especially because we went into that meeting not even knowing what was going to be discussed.
So you did not
You didn't know
receive an agenda?
at all why you were being called to a meeting?
At all, Chair.
You were just told, come to Cape Town for a meeting tomorrow.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay. But you didn't get the call. You didn't get the call from the ministry. You got the call from the chairperson of the board, who had been called
Indeed.
by the ministry or the minister.
Indeed, Chair.
Okay, all right.
Who was present at the meeting?
In Cape Town.
Yes.
So when we arrived and meeting in Cape Town, it was, Minister Gigiba, who was the chair of the meeting, Mr. Siabonga Mahlangu, Ms. Raisibe Lepule.
I'm sorry, Mr. Matlango and?
Ms. Raisibe.
Yes.
Lepule, who was, I think she was the DGG or the Director General, what is it called, Director of Aviation, but she was one of
Okay.
those that looked
For
after
the-
aviation.
For the record, that is spelled Raisibe and then Lepule.
Yes. And Professor Vusi Gumede, who was the other advisor to the minister, I think more his economic advisor, if I'm not mistaken. The DG, Mr. Tsidiso Matoma, and other departmental representatives.
Ms. Mzimela, is this the same DG that you sent the memorandum to 3 days later, 3 days earlier?
Indeed it is.
Please proceed as to what then
And,
transpired.
and the venue of the meeting was where?
The venue of the meeting was the DPE offices in Cape Town.
DPE
DPE at
offices, yeah.
Yes, in
Okay.
DPE offices in Cape Town.
In Parliament,
Yes, indeed.
okay.
Yeah. So, as I indicated, Chair, that we had no idea what the meeting was about. When Mr. Taka was asking me, I was actually speculating and thinking, no, maybe it actually related to a request for a guarantee, but we're just thinking all
You
sorts of
didn't know
things.
what to take along
But we didn't know what to take along.
and how to prepare for the meeting,
That's correct, Chair.
okay.
And
And
we,
the chair who had told you about the meeting also didn't know,
yes,
okay.
she equally did not know why the meeting had been called. And as I said, I've indicated the people that I recall who were there, and as I said, other DPE departmental personnel as well. And Mr. Gigaba, as the chair of the meeting, then indicates at the start of the meeting that he has several items that he would like to discuss with us. But first and foremost, he wants to actually get an update on the Jet Airways SAA discussions.
Well, you say first and foremost, I get the impression that those are the words he used.
Yes, he does
Okay.
say that. I mean, first and foremost, what
Yes,
we would like,
okay.
I mean, is to get an update
Okay,
on the Jet Airways, on the Jet Airways SAA discussions.
And for that particular item for discussion, is it to be understood that he gave preference then to that as above to any other matters which were urgent within the organization?
The truth of the matter, if I can just talk through, I mean, the meeting as well. In the end, we concluded that meeting discussing nothing else except, I mean, for the Jet.
Except that item.
Except for that item. But he had actually opened up the discussions, stating that there are a number of issues that he wants to discuss with us, but he wants to start first and foremost with the India-South Africa route.
But based on your position as Group CEO at the time, how did the urgency of this particular matter compare to any other matters of urgency within SAA?
It was, we had far more urgent issues, and which is why, even in responding to this urgent request to go to attend a meeting in Cape Town, our speculations, at no point did we even imagine that the discussion topic was going to be about
Jet
the India
Airways.
route. You know, we speculated about everything else, thinking we probably need to discuss or provide an update in terms of the guarantee. You know, maybe it actually relates to some of the issues that we have been ongoing discussions, I mean, with the department on what needs to be done within the organization. So long and short is that it was really the list of our priorities.
Before the discussion on this matter, he didn't articulate what those are the other issues were. He just said he had a long list, but the first one was he wanted to be briefed on the progress on the discussions between SAA and Airways about the Mumbai route.
Indeed, Chair, I do not recall
Yes.
him mentioning any other
Any
topic
other
except for
matter?
this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, continue.
And then-
Please.
So it did take me a little bit by surprise that I was finding myself once again having to provide an update on the Mumbai route, especially because I had just a few days before had provided a written memorandum to the DG on where we were with our discussions with Jet Airways. But I started, and the ministers asked me to provide feedback, So I basically started to provide the feedback on the basis of what I had shared with the DG to say, this is where we are.
The DG was present in the meeting.
The DG was present
Yes.
in the meeting to say, this is where we are. This is the progress that has been made or the progress that has not been made. These are some of the suggestions of the options that we have tabled with Jet Airways. But before I could even finish, Mr. Siyabonga Mahlangu intervenes very, very, very angrily. Yeah? And it starts to, to say...
Without being allowed by the chairperson, just intervened abruptly.
Yes, Chair. Which is why I'm saying before I could even finish my briefing, right in the middle of my briefing, he intervenes. And he says he is really tired of the amount of time that we are wasting on this matter. As far as is concerned, we're wasting taxpayers' money, there are toilets that need to be built, and we are just wasting time. And he's equally tired of these management who are always continuously presenting analysis to support their position on why a certain decision is being taken. And all he sees is that we're just failing to understand that these are issues of national importance and we should just get off the route. Mr. Gigaba fails to reprimand Mr. Mahlangu. So he continues, and completely unacceptable and rude behavior, in my view. And he goes on and on about executives who do not listen. And in my view, it gets to a point where I look at it and say, this is getting quite personal now. He's now attacking me. If he starts to talk about executives who don't listen, and all they do, as I said, is just present analysis on why things should be done in a particular way. And because Mr. Gigaba is not intervening, no one is saying anything at that point in time, I then just got to a point where I got really angry and upset, okay, because it was getting quite personal. So at that point, I then told Mr. Mahlangu that, look, stop it now, this is becoming quite personal, and I'm quite angry about this, because do not personalize an issue which is a business commercial issue. If you have issues which are more on a personal basis, I'm happy to take the discussion outside of the room, but this is not the place for us, to be having this discussion. And I actually felt that he was being quite disrespectful because in my view, and I shared with him that I don't believe that I'm ever disrespectful, to anyone. Even if you have a different viewpoint, you can present that different viewpoint, but in a respectable manner. And I actually felt that he was being very disrespectful in the manner in which he was talking.
And I get the impression that the one feature which was common between the first meeting which you attended with the minister on this issue with Minister Gigaba, where Mr. Goyal was present, and this meeting where Jet Airways wasn't there, but you were meeting with the minister and his advisor and the DG and other departmental personnel, the one feature that seems to be common is that there is somebody who just goes for SAA quite heavily.
Indeed, Chair. I think that in the second meeting, it was now Mr. Mahlangu taking the place of Mr. Goyal's attitude in the first meeting.
Yes.
The only difference that in the second meeting is that he is now, in his anger, is telling us how we are wasting South African taxpayers' money by continuing to operate that route, and we don't understand that this is of national importance. I'm not too sure why. The termination of Johannesburg-Mumbai was of national importance, but he basically, takes that tone.
But was his tone more or less the same as that of Mr. Goyal, the tone of talking to SAA about this issue?
He was probably worse, I would
Probably
say.
worse.
Probably worse.
Yes.
And I say probably worse because, as I indicated, Chair, that he actually started to become quite personal, as well in terms of these executives you know, who just don't understand what they should be doing. And do we not understand? Essentially, he was basically alluding to the fact that we should just basically be implementing an instruction and not trying to present our own viewpoint on what decision should be taken on Jet Airways. And yet, having said that, no one had ever said to us, okay, terminate. I don't remember them writing to us.
Well, I was about to ask, because your position as SA, you articulated your position quite clearly at the first meeting, that you were not talking about closing the route,
Yes.
but you were open to discussions aimed at some partnership.
Yes,
And Mr. Mahlangu was at that meeting.
yes.
And this is another meeting. He knows your position. He knows what Mr. Goyal had said at the previous meeting. He knows that you disagreed with him. He knows that at that meeting, the minister didn't say he agreed with Mr. Goyal, at least not expressly. But now from what you say, it looks like he was speaking as if a decision had been taken by the department or by SAA or by the South African government that the road should be closed, and you are just wasting time.
Indeed.
Is my understanding of your evidence correct?
That's correct, Chair. Hence, I was going to make the point that for me it was surprising because it's not as if we'd ever received any official correspondence from that says, SAA, you shall close the route. This is the point at which Mr. Daka also then intervenes.
Well, before that, am I correct to understand that another feature that's common between that first meeting and this meeting is that the chair of the meeting keeps quiet when this kind of attack, in quotes, if one can talk about it, but this harsh criticism directed at SAA happens, the chairperson keeps quiet.
Indeed, Chair.
Okay, continue.
So it is at this point when Mr. Daka also then intervenes and directs his communication to the chair, which is the minister at that point in time, where he then makes the point that he is not happy with the way in which Mr. Mahlangu is conducting himself, and that he wishes to confirm that the executives had done extensive work around the analysis of the closure of the route, and that the board had equally applied its mind on the recommendations, and that they were comfortable with the recommendations that had been put forward by management, and that when he wanted to make it very clear that we would not allow ourselves then to be bullied by anybody in regard to this decision.
At this stage, and maybe at the stage of the first meeting already, the board had already made a decision in terms of which they accepted your recommendation, your team's recommendation that the route should not be closed. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chair.
And that was the position even before the first meeting?
That's correct, Chair.
So in effect, what you were being told to do, both by Mr. Goyal, but maybe more importantly by Mr. Mahlangu, who was advisor to the minister, was do something that would be contrary to a board decision.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes, okay.
Did Minister Gigaba contribute at any stage in this meeting?
Because Mr. Daka was now addressing Mr. Gigaba directly in his comments, this is the point at which Mr. Gigaba then responds. And he responds by just simply stating that he would still like SAA and Jet Airways to try and find each other. Those are his words, to try and find each other.
And then what happens?
And then what happens is that at this point, he then says the Jet Airways personnel must be invited into the meeting. So once again,
Oh,
So once again,
Yeah.
they're inviting Jet Airways personnel to join the meeting. We were not aware that they were sitting outside the meeting, just as much as we were not aware that the discussion for the day related to the Johannesburg-Mumbai route.
Did any further discussions take place then in relation to the Mumbai route after Jet Airways representatives joined the meeting?
No, Chair, because they walk in, they are introduced. It is Mr. Goyen and a representative, so the introduction is more, with Mr. Teddy Daka, who had not met them up until that point. And it's essentially to say these are the Jet Airways people. And again, Mr. Gigaba repeats how he would like to get Jet Airways and SAA to find each other. But nothing further. It's not like they sit down like the first meeting where we have like a further discussion as to what is meant by this try and find each other. It's just an introduction, and this is where the meeting actually ends.
And this is circumstances where a meeting was held which was attended by SAA, Jet Airways, and chaired by Mr. Gigaba, at which it was quite clear that the parties were not anywhere close to discussing the same thing. The one was discussing that, or was saying the other must pull out of the route, and the other one was saying, well, we can talk about a partnership. And then there had been a meeting which didn't involve the Department of Public Enterprises between SAA and Jet Airways. Again, the report you got was no progress was made. And then there was this meeting which maybe it's difficult to say was attended by Jet Airways because they were not there during the meeting, but they came at the tail end, and not much was discussed after that, where it was quite clear that between SAA and whoever was at the meeting who spoke in favor of the closure of the route, there was a big gap. Is my understanding correct?
Your understanding is correct.
Okay. And is that how the meeting ended, namely with the minister suggesting that SA and Jet Airways should continue to try and find each other?
That is correct, Chair.
Okay.
Did Minister Gigaba give any directive at the end of the meeting on further engagements?
What he indicated is that the DG would then be tasked to ensure that the discussions took place and would be managing any further or coordinating any further discussions from his side at any rate, coordinating any further discussions between Jet Airways and SAA.
Do you know whether the minister might have certain benefits that he thought were quite important to both parties if they were to reach agreement? Did he share with you maybe any particular benefits that he felt were really important that SA could obtain if the parties could reach agreement?
No, Chair, he didn't share anything in that regard. And as much as these are the examples that I'm using in my testimony, I'll still make the point that each time we're taken by surprise in terms of the importance the department was placing on this route. Because we would attend the meetings, but going back into the organization, you prioritize the things that are important. So discussions are ongoing, but for us it was not a priority. We had so many other things which were of much greater importance to the organization than this Jet Airways code share. As much as it would have actually, we were happy to have discussions because it would have improved our performance on the Johannesburg-Mumbai, but it was really not the top of our priority list. So it continued to puzzle me as to the amount of time and effort that the department was spending in trying to find a solution or find a workable solution between SAA and Jet Airways.
And each time these meetings happened, they happened at very short notice, certainly for SAA.
Yes, Chair.
Now, had you had much experience in dealing with advisors of ministers in the positions you had held before this encounter with the Minister Gigaba's advisor, Mr. Mahlangu?
No, Chair.
You had not had.
I had not. That was something that I actually found quite strange as well, between the experience under the then Minister Barbra Hogan and Minister Gigaba at the time, was that I knew and I was aware that Minister Hogan had advisors at the time, but they had never involved themselves with the day-to-day or operational matters pertaining to the entities. My understanding was that the advisors were there to advise the minister, and even if they're present in the meetings with each of the entities, that their main role was to advise the minister. But it was different with Mr. Siyabonga Mahlangu. It just changed. I mean, overnight, this was an individual who would spend a lot of time within the SAA system, getting involved in matters such as this, but even beyond, where he had a very great interest in other issues, especially pertaining to procurement within SAA, which was very odd.
Okay, thank you.
Do you recall ever meeting with the minister again regarding this particular issue of the Mumbai Route?
No, I don't recall any further meeting pertaining to the Mumbai Route.
And so let's put things into a time perspective, with your help, of course. Through your evidence, you've informed that, as we know, that Minister Malusi Gigaba was appointed on the 1st of November 2010. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the first engagement that you have with him, particularly in relation to this, of the Mumbai route, is on the 10th of January 2011, when you get called to a meeting in relation to that.
Yes.
On the 24th of January, there's a follow-up meeting, which is held at the direction of the minister at the time for the parties to collaborate and see how they can find each other. On the 11th of April 2011, you write a detailed memorandum which gives a full update as to what the Mumbai route, or rather the status of the Mumbai route. Is that right?
That's correct.
But 3 days later, on the 14th of April, or rather let me precede that by saying that on the 11th of April, when you write this memorandum, you send it to the DG, who is also in attendance at the meeting on the 14th of April, which is but 3 days later after the date of that memorandum. Is that right?
That's correct.
And this is all in the context of monthly meetings that take place between SAA and DPE on operational and financial updates, which arise out of the government guarantees that have been given to SAA. Is that correct?
That's correct.
On page 25 of the bundle, you were presented with a letter by the Commission's investigators. And I understand that you've considered that letter.
That's correct.
Can I ask you to please turn to page 127, which unfortunately is another one of these letters that, despite efforts, we could not find a better copy of. Have you considered this letter, Ms. Mzimela?
From what I can read, because it's not a very clear document, but yes, I see that the letter is a letter that's addressed to me by the DG, and it talks specifically about the Mumbai-Johannesburg route, and this is the DG requesting very detailed information from SAA relating to the Mumbai route.
And just for the record, on page 128, it appears that the date of the letter is 9 May 2011, from what I can see. And on page 1...
That looks like 3 May 2011.
Yeah.
That looks to me like 3 rather than 9.
We've been informed that it's a 9
Is
May.
it a 9?
In fact, that would also accord with what she's written in paragraph 66
Ms.
of her
Mzimela,
affidavit.
do you have a better idea whether it's a 9 or another number, another date?
I cannot confirm, Chair, because to me it looks like it says 3-5.
Okay, all right.
We'll resolve on May 2011
Yes,
then.
okay, no, that's fine.
On page 129 is a list of detailed information that appears to be requested. In fact, it lists 14 items.
Yes.
What comments do you have to the type of information that was requested by the DG from you?
I think my comment would be that this information is very detailed in its nature. It's the type of information that the team would have actually utilized to even come up with the recommendation on what we should be doing on Johannesburg-Mumbai, because it actually talks to issues like cargo loads, the split of revenue, seat capacity, cargo revenue, profitability, market share. It's the type of information that the commercial team would have interrogated in coming up with the position on recommendation on what we do on the Mumbai route. So my sense in terms of this request is that it actually felt like, oh, somebody is going to redo the analysis that has already been done by the SAA team, which can only imply that you do not trust what you've been provided.
Do you know whether or not this information was indeed provided to the DG?
I would imagine that it was. I do not fully recall, as I say, but any request that actually came through and it was a written request to the organization, we would always respond.
You said that at the end of the meeting in Cape Town, where the Jet Airways representatives were called at the end of the meeting, were called in at the end of the meeting, you said something like the minister suggested that going forward, the DG should play some role in trying to help SAA and Jet Airways to reach some agreement. Is that right?
That's correct, Chair.
So this letter from the DG may have been pursuant to that suggestion by the minister.
Indeed, Chair.
Yeah.
Except that it still surprised me in terms of the level of detail.
Yes,
Yes.
that was requested.
Yes.
What was your understanding of what that suggestion meant in terms of the role that the DG was going to play? Did you have a clear picture of what the suggestion implied he would do? Would he call the parties and chair the meeting and try and get them to agree, or exactly what he would do? Was that clear to you?
The minister at the meeting did not make it very clear as to what role the DG was supposed to play. But the way in which I interpreted his statement, or him saying that the DG would play a much bigger role, is I understood it that the DG would ensure that meetings are taking place and that we are continuing to try and maybe speed up a resolution on a partnership. not to actually get involved in the actual analysis.
Of course, you say on the partnership, Jet Airways may have been saying on the closure of the airline. But the minister had used partnership at the meeting.
No, the minister had just said he wants Jet Airways and SAA to find each other.
Okay, thank you.
And then just on closure of that Cape Town meeting, what happened a few days after that meeting held in Cape Town where Mr. Siyabonga Mahlangu had made these personal verbal attacks, in inverted commas, on you?
So what happened, because the meeting didn't end very well, as you can imagine. But a few days later, I got a call from Mr. Mahlangu, and he asked for us to actually meet very quickly at the Intercontinental at the airport. It's not far from our offices. And I agreed to meet with him, curious, of course, to understand what the meeting was all about. And at that meeting, he basically was apologizing. So he came and he was saying he wanted to actually apologize by the way he handled himself at the meeting. He accepts that it was incorrect and it was disrespectful of him to actually speak to me in the manner that he did. But he goes on to say that I need to understand, though, that he was only doing his job.
Yes, and what did you say about that part, that he was doing his job?
Chair, I just listened and I didn't say anything.
Yeah.
I think on the one level, I appreciated the fact that he had actually come through and acknowledged that he needed to apologize.
Yes.
But I didn't want to get into a further discussion as to what does it mean that he was doing his job.
Okay.
And just to clarify what you state in your affidavit, Ms. Mzimela, at page 24, paragraph 62.1, the last sentence to me is that he personally apologized to me for his bad behavior and informed me to the effect that at the end of the day, he was just doing his job and acting on instruction. Does that part of your sentence remain to be true and correct?
That he was acting on instruction.
Yes.
Those may not have been his exact words. That's why I'm saying the gist of his apology to me was that he was only doing his job and essentially working on instruction to do what he did at the meeting, or to behave in the manner that he did at the meeting.
So, are you saying he might not have used the words that he was acting on instruction, but whatever words he used, you say, meant the same thing?
That's correct, Chair.
Yes. Did you have an understanding of who he was talking about as having given him an instruction?
As a person who is the advisor to the minister, my assumption was that he can only be taking instruction from his boss, who is the minister.
Okay.
Can we then go to page 25, paragraph 69, and you talk about headway that is then made between the two parties, being SAA and Jet Airways. What happens on the 29th of November 2011 and the 14th of December 2011?
So according to this, I make the point that at some point, because we continued to have discussions with Jet Airways, that at some point in 2011, Jet Airways conceded to what SAA was actually proposing, and that there was a letter of intent that was signed on the 29th of November 2011, and that on the 14th of December 2011, the two entities signed an MOU to enter into a code-share agreement. What is relevant, at this point, is that at the point at which this actually happens, Jet Airways has now taken the decision to terminate their operations on the Mumbai-Johannesburg route.
Okay, Miss September, I've lost where you are.
Page 25 of the bundle, paragraph 69, which continues on page 26.
Okay, thank you. So Jet Airways concedes sometime during late in 2011 that, or considered to the option of code sharing?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Thank you. Is it correct that certain approvals may have been required for finalization of a service level agreement between, a code share agreement, sorry, between Jet Airways and SAA?
In the case, by the time the actual code share agreement is being concluded with Jet Airways, what has happened? You recall that I said Jet Airways had come onto the route, was operating the 7 frequencies. They then indicate to us as part of the discussions that they're looking to possibly reconsider the position on operating on Johannesburg, Mumbai. And in fact, they then make the decision to, they initially announced it initially as a suspension of their service for a period of time, but we knew that they were withdrawing from the route completely. What that does is that it obviously changes the dynamics, because we have competition rules that actually stipulate that if there is one carrier on the, if there's one carrier on the route and we're both going to co-share, in order to make sure that it is not seen as collusion, especially because they had operated and were pulling out in order to co-share with us. There was a need, we felt, as the SAA team, to get an opinion firstly, to say, should we be applying for an exemption in relation to the code-share agreement with the Competitions Commission or not? And an opinion was obtained, and it indicated that indeed we should apply for an exemption, because we're trying to avoid finding ourselves where we get fined by the Competitions Commission for having broken any of the rules. I think for those that remember what was happening around SAA at that point in time, there were a number of anti-competitive matters that SAA was dealing with. So we're being extremely careful in ensuring that we do not fall foul of the competition issues. So,
And did this then eventually culminate in an agreement being concluded between the parties?
yes, it did. And it did culminate in an agreement being concluded, which is a co-share agreement with SAA operating the route, Johannesburg-Mumbai, with SAA benefiting from that behind and beyond network of Jet Airways. And likewise, Jet Airways then could put their code as a marketing carrier, not operating carrier, as a marketing carrier onto the SAA route from Mumbai to Johannesburg and to some of the points in South Africa.
And in the lead up to the conclusion of this agreement, was there any engagement with the Department of Public Enterprises and the DG in particular in order to facilitate processes?
Indeed, there was an engagement, as I indicated, that when we received the opinion that indicated that it would be good for us, to apply for an exemption from the Competitions Commission. We then wrote to the DG to assist us to try and facilitate a quicker response from the Competitions Commission, because we had been advised that ordinarily it actually takes about 6 to 12 months to sometimes to get a response back from the Competition Commission.
And then can I ask you, to please turn to page 148.
Yes.
Is this the code sharing agreement that was concluded between the parties on the 1st of October 2012?
That is correct.
Is it correct that this agreement was concluded shortly before you left the organization?
Based on the date, indeed, it is the case.
And then can I ask you to please turn to page 180. And there appears to be the signatures of the contracting parties. Who signed on behalf of South African Airways?
The person that signed on behalf of South African Airways is Mr. Tienes Porgeta, who was the GM of Commercial at that time, together with Mark Cavalier, who was the head of global sales and alliances at South African Airways.
And whose names appear as signatories on behalf of Jet Airways India Limited?
It says here Mr. Nikos Kardassis and Raj Sivakuma. I don't know them.
And then you have actually brought the following page to our attention, and that is on page 183.
Yes.
Can you please inform what your concern was around this particular page?
My concern did not relate only to page 183, but it related to page 181 to 183, which is the Appendix A of the agreement. And what I brought to your attention is that I can confirm that this agreement was the agreement that was signed, because I know that it was the GM commercial, Tienes Pothita, who was in place when I was at SAA and in charge of this communication. But I had raised a concern in relation to page 181 to 183, which is Annexure 1 that forms part of this agreement, simply because Annexure 1 is now signed by different people to the individuals that signed the rest of the document, being Tienes Pothita and Mark Cavalier.
Thank you. And so because you resigned in October of 2012, which was but a few days later, you were not aware of how this particular agreement was implemented. Is that right?
That's correct.
Well, before we talk about implementation, the annexure about which you have expressed the concern that you have just articulated, is that annexure referred to in the agreement?
Yes, Chair.
Yes, Chair.
And I see that there is no indication on the last page of that annexure, as to when those who appended their signatures there actually appended their signatures. Do we know whether that annexure was signed on the same day as the actual agreement?
Chair, what I was raising was precisely that, to say there is no way that this annexure would have been signed on the same day
Yes.
that the agreement was signed.
Yes, because
Because-
same people would have signed.
Yes, because had it been signed on the same day, the actual GM of commercial would have been the one signing this annexure as well. And
Yes.
you will note that the annexure A then gets signed by an acting GM of commercial,
Yes.
Mr. Manosh Papa.
Yes.
And the person who PPs with him is also not Mark Cavalier. So somebody puts a PP on behalf of
Yes.
Mark.
Yes.
Yes.
And so your point is you have an agreement that refers to a certain annexure.
That's correct.
The agreement is signed on a certain day.
Yes.
The annexure is also signed the two are signed by different people. Is that right? It's not everybody who is different, but some are different.
The Annexure A is signed by two totally different people on behalf of SAA, as opposed to the rest of the document and the rest of the annexures
Yes.
that are aligned to the document.
So you are able to say not only in relation to the agreement, but also when you compare with other annexures. So the other annexures were signed by the people who signed the agreement.
That is correct, Chair.
This is the only annexure which has different signatures, different people signing on behalf of SAA.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes, and then you say, based on that, could not have been signed at the same time.
That's correct, Chair.
Yeah. At that time, had you had a chance to see the Annexure A that was supposed to have been part of the agreement? I just want to see whether, if you had seen it, whether it was different in terms of content to this one that we see now? Or you might not have taken note?
No, Chair. From an SAA perspective, the reason why it is the GM of commercial and the head of global sales development and alliances who signs is because at that point they do have, delegated authority to sign agreements on anything which is revenue enhancing in their space. So I would have been aware, for example, which is what I confirmed, that I'm aware that we actually signed, the letters or the MOIs and the letter of intent and the MOI. But the actual conclusion of the agreement, the team would have worked with their respective departments within the organization in terms of setting out the detail along the principles that had been agreed. So I can't say this is how the first annexure looked like without actually having it in front of me.
Yes.
Yeah.
But based on what you knew to be the principles that were supposed to guide your team in whether to sign or not to sign or in negotiating an agreement, are you able to say whether or not the contents of this annexure signed by a team different from the one that signed the agreement, whether the contents appear to be in line with those principles, or is that something that you have not had a chance to reflect on?
I can confirm, Chair, that they would be in line with the principles. But the detail, though, is important. Because whenever we say something is reciprocal, if I give you access to Johannesburg, Cape Town, Johannesburg, Cape Town is a lot more valuable than Johannesburg, PE,
Well,
for argument's
I'm
sake.
happy you didn't say Johannesburg, Durban.
Yes, I try to avoid that, Chair. Is a lot more valuable for maybe SAA than Johannesburg PE. So whenever we talk about reciprocal benefit, you also look at that type of detail. So that's why I'm saying, in terms of the principles of basically saying we provide them with beyond points out of Johannesburg, and equally they do so out of Mumbai, that's correct, and it's here and it's in line. But the actual detail, which is then contained in Annexure 1, I'm not too sure whether it's completely aligned, because it then depends on which routes we gave for what.
So would it be correct then to say you are simply drawing attention to the fact that this annexure was signed by a different team on the side of SAA to the team that signed the agreement and all the other annexures, but whether its contents, whether there's something wrong with the contents, that is something you are not able to say?
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
It would be good to know, even if by way of a supplementary affidavit, it would be good to know whether, if you take time after today to have a look, whether you are able to draw my attention to anything significant in terms of what you expected. So I suggest that at the earliest opportunity, later today or after today, get a chance to have a look and be in touch with the evidence leader, and if need be, a supplementary affidavit can be prepared to say you have had a look, these are the observations you want to make, if any. If there are no particular observations you want to highlight, you can just tell the evidence leader that you had a look, but there's really nothing you want to say.
Chair, I would like to actually raise that it would be impossible for me to be able to do that in the absence of actually getting a copy of the original Annexure A, so that I can look to see what is the difference between the first
Yes.
Annexure A and this one here.
Yes. Well, you can ask, the legal team can try and see if that can be facilitated.
Yes.
Yeah, so just ask them to facilitate your getting that. Okay, thank you.
We'll certainly do our best to try to obtain the original if one so exists. Chair, this particular...
Yeah, and I think it's important because it is queer. if one annexure out of a number of annexures and the agreement is signed by a different team, and all the others in the agreement are signed by another team. But it may be that one, there is no problem with the content, and two, there is an explanation. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, this commission will recall, before we move on to the next topic, that evidence was placed before it by the witness of Ms. Faiki Mento, and that was on the 27th or 28th of August 2018, where she specifically addressed her version on matters relating to the Mumbai Route. And in this regard, I'd like to ask Ms. Mzimela firstly, before I advance a summary that I've put together of that evidence, if you are aware that Ms. Faiki Mento had given evidence before this commission in relation to the Mumbai Route.
Yes, I am aware.
Chair, in my own words, having considered the evidence, it is understood that when Ms. Faiki Mento attended the residence of the Guptas, she was offered by Mr. A.J. Gupta the position of Minister of Public Enterprises in the recent future when the President was going to reshuffle the cabinet. At that time, Minister Barbra Hogan was going to be reshuffled. Minister Hogan being the incumbent to that position. Ms. Faiki Mento informed that she would become minister if she agreed to abolish the South African-India-South Africa route. She also informed that when Ms. Mento asked Mr. Gupta about what would happen to passengers and cargo for that route,
Well,
Mr. Gupta informed.
Yes, well, why don't you, if there's something to put to this witness, why don't you just put it to the witness to say, if you want her comment. I can't remember anything that Ms. Mento said that may have related to this witness, but it's a long time ago. Maybe I've forgotten. I can't remember.
As it pleases, Chair.
Is there anything that in her evidence that needs to be put to this witness?
Yes, Chair. In fact, I'd like her to comment on the version that had been presented.
I think just go straight to it.
I'll do that then. Ms. Mzimela, it was the evidence before this commission that Ms. Faiki Mento, when attending the residence of the Guptas, was offered by Mr. A.J. Gupta the position of the Minister of Public Enterprises in the recent future when the President was going to reshuffle cabinet. It was also her evidence that Minister Barbra Hogan at the time was going to be reshuffled.
I'm sorry, I think you're starting far.
Sorry?
I think start much closer to where you must ask her. I think you're starting far at the back. What did she say? What did Ms. Mento say that concerns this witness?
Chair, the version that I wish to put to this witness for comment is more so about the sequence of events and whether or not she has any comments to the version that had been put.
What is the sequence that is important for this witness to comment on? Is there anything that this witness has said in terms of sequence that's inconsistent with the sequence that was given by Ms. Mento?
Excuse me, Chair?
Is there any sequence of events that has been given by this witness that is inconsistent with the sequence of events that was given by Ms. Mento?
No, Chair, but we do believe that this witness has comment to
Yes,
the
what is
sequence
it?
of
That's
events.
what I want to know. What did she say, that is Ms. Mento, that you think is inconsistent with what the witness has said?
Ms. Mento is, in a nutshell, Ms. Mento was offered the position of the Minister of Public Enterprises on the basis that she stops the South Africa and India Mumbai route. I accept that, Chair. The next point is that Ms. Barbra Hogan was the incumbent of the position at the time. which accords with this particular witness's evidence during her tenure as Group Chief Executive Officer.
Yes, we don't want to put what is consistent with what she has said.
Having said that, there was also evidence given that Mr. Gupta informed Ms. Mentor, when asked about what is to happen to the passenger and cargo, that Mr. Gupta informed that they were in partnership with an airline, Jet Airways, and that they would see to that.
Yes.
Ms. Mentor rejected the offer.
Yes, but
And
what
Mr.
does that have
Malusi
to do
Gigaba-
with this witness? That's the question.
Sorry, Chair?
But what does that have to do with this witness, the evidence of this witness?
This witness is certainly poised to be in a position to share with this commission her observations based on her engagement with the ministry in relation to this route. And to the extent that she can offer her observations specific to her role,
Yes,
we would
observation.
appreciate.
She has told us about 2 meetings that she attended which involved the minister and where the issue of the Mumbai route was discussed. So far, I'm not understanding what it is that you want to put to her. Is there something that Ms. Mentor said which is inconsistent with what this witness has said? Or is there something else that she said which might not be inconsistent with what this witness has said, but which you would like this witness to see whether she can confirm?
Let me ask the question then differently through you, Chair. Ms. Mzimela, was there any peculiarity in your experience and observations when engaging with Minister Gigaba and his office, specific to the focus on the Mumbai route and its closure?
Chair, I think I have already highlighted the fact that I did find it strange as to amount of attention that this route was being given
Yes.
from the ministry in the context of all of the other routes
Yes.
that were probably a lot more significant to SAA. That is the one. I did equally find it strange that there was so much urgency each time that we needed to be in response to issues relating to this matter.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're then now on page 29, where you talk about the minister's advisor, in particular, Mr. Siyabonga Mahlangu.
Yes.
You address his conduct from page 82 until 85 on page 31. Can you explain Mr. Siyabonga Mahlangu's involvement in the operations or the workings of SAA relative to the position that he had?
So, Chair, I had actually indicated that the difference between the advisors during Ms. Hogan's time and Mr. Gigaba's time is that we hardly saw the advisors. We only saw them when the minister was actually present. And the difference with Mr. Siyabonga Mahlangu as an advisor to the minister is that he seemed to have a very keen interest on SAA's operations and in particular the procurement side. In my affidavit, I actually give 2 examples which confirm some of that unusual behavior. And the first being in relation to an IT procurement tender where he seemed to have a very keen interest as to, how that procurement process was being handled. And I make the point as well that his approach would always be on the basis of indicating that he is only trying to respond to queries that have been raised by black-owned companies who feel that they're being excluded from some of these tenders. In my documents, I indicate that my response to him always was that, and especially in relation to the IT tender, firstly, even I had to go back to understand what was he talking about, because it's not as if I would actually pay particular interest on anything which was part of the procurement process, and was able to say he needs to be, just to clarify SAA's position, that it's not about trying to exclude black-owned companies, that sometimes it is a matter of whatever is actually required being a very specialized system. It might come across to people who don't understand that we're just simply looking for an IT system, but the type of tender that he had an interest on was an IT platform that basically supports passenger bookings and so forth, highly, specialized. So that was my one response to him in assisting or attempting to assist him to respond to the issues that he raises, that it's black-owned companies that are complaining that SAA is excluding them from the process. But I equally indicated that from a personal perspective, that I do not get involved in good corporate governance is such that there are certain processes and procedures that are in place to ensure that we follow the right processes, and there's complete transparency on how issues are processed by the procurement department. And one of those is to ensure that even a person like me, who is the group CEO at that point in time, do not get involved in who is being chosen. You only get involved at the point at which someone comes with a recommendation to be signed off, and even then, provided that it's above their delegated authority for approval. If it is one of those that requires Group CEO approval, then it would make it to my table, and at that point, I then need to apply my mind in ensuring they follow the correct processes, and I understand what was the background for them to recommend whoever it is they're recommending at that point in time. So that was my response. But I bring this, and I include this here because it wasn't, the only time that he seemed to have really, a big interest on procurement within the SAA space. I also make particular reference to feedback that I had received from Advocate Kutsia, who also had attended a meeting relating to setting up a panel of lawyers for the SOCs, or there had been a meeting called by the SOC heads. Again, it was on the basis that the black legal profession was raising concerns that they're not being given equal opportunity with regard to some of the work that's being undertaken on the SOCs. And her feedback to myself is that the meeting, which was meeting of all of the SOC legal individuals, accepted that position and responded to basically saying yes, because all of us would always be geared in terms of trying to do our bit in transforming some of those areas, that it would be something which would be a key focus area. But she, in sharing her feedback with me, raised that she was, though, quite surprised at that very meeting, because when people in the meeting said, we're happy to actually support the initiative and we've always been aligned to try and improve the transformation. However, whatever gets done must be done according to internal processes. That it is at that point that Mr. Mahlangu seemed to get quite upset, and he took over the chairing of that meeting, because he was not chairing that meeting, to say, no. He's not very happy with people now telling him that they would still need to go back into their systems to ensure that whatever they do, it's not breaking any governance, not breaking any compliance issues within their own organizations.
Before you move on to the next paragraph at 85 on page 30, Chair, the affidavit of Advocate Sandra Kutsia, which talks to these experiences that she had with Mr. Siyabonga Mahlangu, is at page 221 to 222, paragraphs 22 to 25. Please continue at paragraph 85, Ms. Mzimela.
I also, Chair, I've been detailed that Mr. Mahlangu in particular was always, one of those people that would actually accuse me of saying, you're not a team player. You're not a team player, whatever that actually meant, to him. And it seemed like the bigger problem that he had or me being described as a team player, is that he was raising issues that whenever they, as I indicated, under Barbra Hogan's time, whenever there was a request to the organization, it would be in writing. What we found, which was different under the then minister, was that all of a sudden, we started to get all of these verbal requests for information, which made us very uncomfortable, because that was not the way in which we were used to operating. So as a result, in most instances, we'd find ourselves confirming in writing from the SAA side the discussions that had been held with any of the officials within DPE. And he seemed to take issue with that we always want to reduce these discussions into writing, because it would really be either myself or the team to just basically say, just in summary, as per the discussion that we had, the following was raised by yourself, and this is our position with regard to these matters.
And you just wanted to have a record of what had been discussed?
Indeed, Chair, because the reason why we were uncomfortable, firstly, they were beginning, especially when it comes to procurement issues. For us, it was important to make sure that it is actually documented, because it was unusual for a person like Mr. Siyabonga Mahlangu to be requesting the type of information that he was requesting, even if it was guided in his view by good intentions of ensuring that there was a change or improvement in the participation of black individuals. So it was important to actually put that in writing. It was also an issue where the organization had no problem with that. And in fact, we had a board that itself would always be quite considerate of how we were trying to do our bit in transforming each of the areas in our business. So for me, it was a little bit uncomfortable to be having a discussion which the board would not be privy to, especially because there's no record of this discussion or these discussions that we're having with the department. And therefore, it was important to be able to put in writing the issues that were raised, but equally to put in writing what our viewpoint was in regard to that. Otherwise, we would probably not be portraying the organization correctly in being accused of not focusing on transformation issues, and yet we were.
Page 31, from paragraph 86, you document the events which led to your resignation.
Yeah.
Can you please...
I'm sorry, Ms. September, maybe this might be an opportune time to take a short break, comfort break.
No problem, Chair.
It will just be 10 minutes, so we'll resume at 4:05. Ms. Mzimela, you may or may not have had in mind that we would finish at 4. What is your situation if we would continue beyond 4 to try and finish your evidence? Is that fine with you?
Yes, Chair. I would really like to
prefer
request that we do finish.
Okay, all right. Okay, let's take the short adjournment and we adjourn.
All right.
Going to get you a chocolate, but anyway. Yes, she actually wanted to play with it. No, I'm waiting. She's waiting for you.
chocolate for doing what I said.
That's I'll just change my flight from 7 to 7. I'll make 7. I won't make 7. What is it? I don't know how to get to bed. How do I get to bed? That's right. No one will say it. More of that. That's the topic.
Okay, let's proceed.
Ms. Mzimela, before the short adjournment, you were about to address the situation of the Board of Directors during the year of 2012. Can you please proceed to do so?
So what I share is that during 2012, the relationship between the board, management, and the ministry became more and more difficult. And
Had the board changed in the meantime, or was it still the same board that was there when you started as CEO in 2010?
it was the same board, Chair. It was the same board. But I think this same board started to feel more and more the frustrations between reporting to the previous ministry and reporting to the then ministry at that point in time. Because they didn't seem to be, let me not saying an understanding of the urgency on some of the matters, but just to use the example even of Mumbai, that there was a lot of attention paid to matters such as that, which were of least priority, and all of the other things that required a lot more urgent attention were not getting proper responses in relation to that. And a number of the board members actually started to complain because they felt that they were quite suspicious, and that's the way they would put it, quite suspicious of DPE's motives in delaying some of these critical decisions that needed to be put into place. Over and above that, suddenly we had a number of these negative media stories being, and in our view, at least from one or two of the board members, the view was that a lot of it could only have come from DPE, because we would normally share where we were or the challenges that we had with the shareholder representatives, and we thought it was in confidence in terms of where the organization was, but we wake up the following day or 2 days later, it actually has made the news, and in most instances also taken out of context. I know that it may not be fair to say that, but it just, when that happens, obviously as a board you begin to question, to say, are the leaks actually coming from the board itself, or are they coming elsewhere? Because the only other people that would have had those discussions with would actually be the ministry, so to speak. Very specifically, there was also a lot of noise in the media about a delay in the AGM, and what was put in the public space was that the AGM is being delayed because the organization has not submitted its annual financial statements on time. And that was not true. Annual financial statements had been delivered on time, and there is a requirement that when you do submit your annual financial statements, that the ministry would sign, and there would be proof that they were delivered on time. Because if not, then obviously the external auditors would find that you would have a finding against not meeting, the deadlines. So it had been submitted, and I think this formed part of my chair's submission to the commission, which is Ms. Cheryl Carolus. I would imagine that she would have actually touched on that. Those are just examples of issues where it just became more and more difficult to do what needed to be done in the organization. And the added dimension was that, as I indicate, that it actually felt as if we were then having to respond in the public space, but to things that were firstly untrue, and secondly, there was a feeling that they actually came from the ministry itself, because in certain instances, the ministry was being quoted as saying they've postponed the AGM because they haven't received annual financial statements, and then yet they have. This is at the point at which then the board
did either the board, I guess it could only be the board, because I would imagine that the CEO or management wouldn't go directly to the ministry, to the minister.
Yes.
But you could liaise with your counterpart, the DG.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you or the board ever raise these issues with the ministry to say, this is what we are concerned about, matters that are coming out in the media, but we don't understand how the media would have known about these, because these are matters that have been shared only between us and the ministry. And if you did raise them, those concerns, what was the response?
Chair, I cannot speak on behalf of the board and what they would have actually raised with the ministry in any way or form. I can confirm that internally between management and the board, management raised their concerns formally as well, I mean, to the board to say that this was becoming hugely problematic in its nature.
Yes.
With anticipation then that the board would take it further and have a discussion with the minister.
But whether they did that, you wouldn't know.
Yes.
Okay.
Before you move on to page 32, paragraph 89, you were in fact, in your position as Group CEO, you were the apex of management and executive management within the organization. Is that right?
That's correct.
And in that particular position, you had learnt of various instances of corporate governance not being observed in the way that it should. Is that right?
That's correct.
What did you do about what you had learnt about, the experiences that you had, and what appeared to have been corporate governance not being observed in the way that it should?
So I raised these issues with the chairperson of the board, because she and I we used to have regular meetings as well, even outside of the board, in order for her to keep abreast with some of the issues and the challenges that we're facing in the organization. So she definitely was aware of some of these challenges. And she was completely aligned with management that it was absolutely wrong for some of these things to occur in the manner that they did. So the involvement, especially of Mr. Siyabonga Mahlangu on a number of issues within the organization, the chairperson was aware of that. And there is an instance which I think she actually even covered in her testimony, where in their frustration, and I described it as in their frustration of not being able to get management to do what they wanted to do, I think they attempted as well to try and see if they could go directly, or Mr. Sibonga go directly to the chairperson to raise their concerns in terms of management not doing what they expected management to do, only to find that the chairperson was very clear on issues relating to governance, and in that particular instance made absolutely sure that she came back to management to understand what was happening and would not attend a meeting where they wanted to raise issues pertaining to operational matters without inviting me to be present at that meeting as well.
And the chairperson throughout your term as CEO from 2010 to 2012 was Ms. Krolos?
That's correct, Chair, except possibly for the last week of my stay at SAA.
Oh, okay.
At paragraph 89 on page 32, you talk about a key turnaround item that was tasked to you to attend to, called the fleet plan, which was aimed at supporting growth strategy. Can you please explain to the Commission what exactly that entailed and why was this initiated?
So part of our turnaround, our strategy was actually a growth strategy. And what I mean by growth strategy is that we felt that the airline needed to grow, especially given that it's a network carrier. It needed to grow the routes that it operated on in order to increase the profitability of the organization. If you're sitting already with very huge costs, you're either looking at cutting the cost completely or you're growing the revenue that you get or obtain in order to cover the cost. But as part of that, or the one major challenge that SAA had at that point in time related to the aircraft and the aircraft types that they were operating. A lot of the aircraft were actually were due for renewal in terms of their leases, because you operate aircraft either as owned aircraft or leased aircraft. So we had a combination of aircraft that were leased and some that were owned, and some of those leases were becoming due for renewal, which was the one issue. The second issue is that in motivating for growth of certain routes or the growth strategy, it required us to ensure that we were utilizing the appropriate aircraft in order to be able to be profitable on the route. Where there were certain routes that were not profitable at that point in time, not because there was no potential for them to be profitable, but simply because we're using the wrong equipment on the aircraft. So these were the things that we needed to try and finalize. In addition to that, the management had also inherited, when I say inherited, because it was a legacy issue pertaining to the A320 contract, where SAA had paid deposits for these aircraft and then had not taken delivery of the aircraft. This team in particular felt that whilst it was still made sense to find a way to conclude the contract on the A320s, by the time we are looking at the fleet, there's even newer generation A320s than the ones that were initially in the contract. So the approach was that let's not take an approach which is you fix one thing, but it doesn't really have a significant impact as part of the turnaround strategy. So the fleet review process was a significant portion of our turnaround strategy. And in order to be able to do this work effectively, what I did was to set up what I called like a fleet committee,
Yes.
which was a new thing, but also aimed at improving governance within the organization, because there had always been horror stories about what happens when there is procurement relating to aircraft. These are significant numbers that we're talking about.
And what was the mandate of this committee?
So the mandate of this committee was to review, to actually analyze all of the routes, to look at issues such as when are leases actually terminating, what would be the appropriate aircraft in supporting the growth strategy, analyze all of that work, and then provide a recommendation in terms of where we should be heading and what type of aircraft we should be looking to bring into the system. So that fleet committee, as I share here, that we did put that together, and I ensured that everybody was represented. By everybody, I mean senior executives from legal, commercial, finance, risk and compliance, and also to include the subsidiaries such as SA Technical and Mango. And it was important to also include those subsidiaries because sometimes you make the decisions on aircraft only from a passenger perspective because it looks good, but you forget to look at what it will cost to maintain the aircraft. So we tried to put together a cross-functional team that would look at the analysis of this proposal. And as part of this, we also, so they signed very tight confidential agreements, which are very specific to this fleet committee, because we wanted to ensure that there were minimum leaks. These are big numbers that are involved whenever you're looking to change aircraft or to put a recommendation forward. We also, in that regard, I also make mention of a small consultancy by the name of Daylight, which was also appointed to assist with the more complex financial analysis. I then bring up the point that there were so many. Part of the reason, and to confirm why it was necessary to put together this committee in this manner, is because there would be so many queries continuously around the fleet and what we intended to do. And not only from the two main suppliers being Boeing and Airbus, trying to find out where we are in the process, but what happens is that an aircraft, you're basically buying a shell from each of the manufacturers. You can decide to go and buy the engines from somebody else. So the people there were people who wanted to have a sense of where we are so that they can also sell us their engines versus anybody's engine, and likewise, Chair.
So this particular committee, which was established, not only augmented governance principles, but it really created a transparent platform on which to conduct a review. Is that
That's
right?
correct. That's correct.
And then once the committee's work had been concluded, what was the process to be followed thereafter in relation to the outcomes of their work?
So the process is that they would come through with a recommendation to myself, which then in supporting that recommendation would table it with the subcommittee of the board, who would review the recommendations and then equally recommend it to the board for approval. And this was done, and whatever was the recommendation of this committee was approved both by the subcommittee of the board and the board, and was therefore onward tabled with the minister, because it falls under those items which are considered to be significant and material in nature. So that we then communicated that the subcommittee to the board had approved a particular position. And it's one of those where we waited and waited, and there were just no responses. And it was unclear as to why we're not getting, responses one way or another to say we either support or don't support or whatever. It just went silent as to, what the issues were there. And yet we had actually highlighted how important timing was, even in assisting us in relation to those negotiations.
It is then understood that the date of the 27th of September 2012 was a very important day in the life of South African Airways.
Yes.
Can you please explain to the Chair what happened on the date of the 27th of September 2012?
On the 27th of September 2012, that a number of the board members then decided to resign from the board of the SAA. In fact, all of the board members resigned except for 3.
Resigned? Did
The
you say in a
directors
set of
resigned from
3?
the board except for 3.
Oh, except for 3.
Except for 3
Okay.
of the non-executive directors.
And who were the 3 that remained?
The 3 that remained was Yake Kwinana, Mr. Dumieni, and Advocate Lindy Thomas.
Thank you.
How big was the board at the time of those resignations? In other words, how many people left and how many, the non-executive ones?
I stand to be corrected, Chair, but I think that it was 9 in total who resigned, because I think we were a board of 14 with 2 executives,
Yes.
which would have made 12, yes.
And those who resigned, did they resign on the same day, or within a few days of one another, or did they resign at a meeting?
They resigned, they resigned on the same day.
Okay.
And the reason why I know that they resigned on the same day is that they had the courtesy of inviting me into a meeting as the board, and because I was the group CEO, to communicate to me their intention to resign. So that I heard it from them and not from any other source. And it is at that meeting where, when they shared with me their intentions to resign, my response was, I don't know why I would be remaining, because I equally share the same frustrations that they were articulating in relation to how things were being handled in the organization. But Ms. Carolus, who was the chair before resignation, then convinces me to say, please, you need to stay in the interest of the stability of the organization. And in her view, she was saying stay because maybe the people they don't want is us as the non-executive directors, and things may potentially be different after we have left. But please, in the interest of the organization, can you remain behind and do not make the call to also resign at the same time? I heeded her advice and said no, I would stay. But even then, I did make it clear, even to Ms. Sharolas, and I said, I'm happy to stay indeed in the interest of the organization, but what would actually determine me staying beyond a particular period in SAA is if there's a sense that things would change. And I would get a better sense of that based on the caliber of people that they appoint on the board and whether there would still be alignment in terms of values and ensuring good corporate governance. Because it was my view, which I think I shared with the board, that the biggest problem with this board is that it was just so strict on insisting that things be done properly, rather than anything else.
Would it be correct, therefore, to say your understanding is that the 9 members of the board who resigned at the same time resigned because they believed that they were not receiving the support that the ministry and the department were supposed to give them and SAA?
That is correct, Chair. And equally, they were disturbed by that they were professionals who were now being portrayed as people who did not understand governance in the public space when there are media leakages that pertain to dates being missed and certain things that have not been done.
So part of it was what was finding its way to the media and being said about SAA and or the board in
Yes.
the media in circumstances where the board, or at least some members of the board, thought it must have been either the ministry or the Department of Public Enterprises that would have shared that information with the media.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay.
After the board's resignation, or rather majority of the board's resignation on the 27th of September 2012, it is understood that you received a telephone call, and that's intimated on page 34, paragraph 96 of the bundle.
Yes.
Maybe, I'm sorry, can I just interrupt you? You have said that you shared the sentiments which drove 9 members of the board to resigning. Do you know whether the 3 members of the board who did not resign also shared those sentiments or not?
Chair, I wouldn't know, except for one, because at that meeting that had been called by the majority of the board members to indicate that they intended to resign, the only other board member that was present at that meeting of the 3 that remained behind was Ms. Kwinana. And I think she was honest at the meeting that she shares those sentiments. However, in her view, given that she is so dependent on government contracts, she feels uncomfortable about how it would be perceived if she actually resigned as well as part of the group.
Oh, that's what she said
That's what she said
at the meeting?
at the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can you please provide details of the telephone call that you received shortly after the board resigned?
I think it was a day or 2 at most, because I was now waiting to hear who would be the new chair of the board. And I received a call from Ms. Myeni to say that she was going to be appointed as the acting chair. So she was calling me to actually request a meeting, that we set up a meeting urgently so that I can bring her up to speed on the matters. So that's the call I received from Ms. Myeni. And then that very evening, on the news, because that's how I found out, on the news, Ms. Vuyisile Kona then gets announced as the new chair of the board and not Ms. Myeni. So that meeting that she requested then never took place because there was no need, for that to be the case.
At that particular point in time, how long had you known Ms. Dudu Myeni?
Ms. Myeni was one of the non-executive directors when I got appointed as CEO. So from the first day that I joined SAA as Group CEO, she was also a member of the board.
So then it was over 2 years.
Yes.
That's correct. What was your reaction when she called you to inform you that she was the one that was to be appointed as the chair?
Well, honestly, I was a little bit surprised. And
Why?
the reason why I was a little bit surprised is because she didn't actually have a fantastic attendance record, as a director. And my assumption would have been that, first, maybe for continuity, indeed, they would have wanted maybe to choose one of the three, but I was quite surprised that the one who has the worst attendance record is the one who then is going to be the chair of the board.
Just to help me ensure that I understand, when you say she had the worst attendance record, does it mean that she attended but didn't stay, or she did not attend?
I think overall she was also one of those that sometimes did not turn up for the meeting at all. If she did turn up for the meeting, I don't know of too many occasions where she stayed for the full time of the board meeting. She was always one of those that found a way to excuse herself prior to the end of the board meeting.
And who would she provide the excuse to be excused from the meeting?
Well, she'll speak to the chair and she'll speak to me. As group CEO to say, look, I'm sorry, I have to run, but maybe her main excuse was that she now has to rush because number one has called her to a meeting.
Sorry?
She has to rush because number one has called her to a meeting.
Oh, she used to say that
Yes, to me,
to you.
Yes.
And what was your understanding of who she was talking about?
I understood her to be speaking about the president at the time, which obviously for me was aligned because she was the chair of the foundation. So I assumed she was being called for that reason.
But Mr. Vusile Kona is the one then who is announced as appointed as the new chair.
That's correct.
Did you meet with Mr. Kona
Yes, I
after
did.
his appointment?
Yes, I did, Chair. And just to indicate that I knew Mr. Vuyisile Kona because Mr. Vuyisile Kona had been an executive at SAA as a VP, can't remember his exact title, but a VP at the time that I was at SAA previously as EVP of the two portfolios that I had held before I left to be CEO of SA Express. So he arrives, and shortly after his appointment, which is the next day essentially, I then met with him, and as an individual who I knew, I then share with him as well my frustrations, which are aligned to the frustrations that had been shared by the board. And I indicate to him that it would really be useful for him to try and establish whether there would be proper support going forward. Because in the absence of proper support going forward, it would really be difficult, even for myself, to actually continue in that environment. So we have a very cordial, as I said, we knew each other because he had been an executive at SAA. So we have this discussion and so forth. And I share quite openly, with him to say, look, it really is challenging because I'm faced with these issues where continuously I'm actually being seen as if I'm not towing the line, much like what I think that is the way in which the board was perceived.
Well, was that not true?
It was true. I'll be honest that yes, it is true that I was not towing the line. Okay. So I share quite openly with Mr. Kona. And it's very understanding, and he shares with me, look, Caesar, you know me, and let's try and work with each other. And he has every intention to actually work well with me, knowing and understanding my expertise and so forth. So we part on that basis.
Yes.
But my issue that I start to have is that within days of Mr. Kona being appointed, in fact, he had that discussion direct with me. He then says, oh, he would like to understand where we are in relation to the aircraft procurement process. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. He's the chair, it was approved, I can actually talk to him.
Yeah,
You know, in terms of where we are, absolutely nothing wrong.
especially with big issues
Indeed.
like that, yeah.
Indeed. What did disturb me, though, is that he did make a comment at that meeting where he says he has been specifically asked to make sure that that's one of the ones he looks at closely. No problem.
He said he had specifically been asked.
To ensure that one of the first things that he reviews is where we are
Oh,
with this
okay.
aircraft procurement
Okay.
process.
Okay,
And as I indicated, Chair, that there's nothing wrong, he's the new chairperson. It's a big procurement matter.
yeah, he
And
would need to
he would
have an
need-
idea of what's urgent, what needs the board's attention, urgent attention, and so on, in terms of giving guidance, wherever.
Yeah. So that is the case. But then also, what then also disturbs me is that he wants the actual documentation, which goes back to even the work that the Fleet Committee undertook, not the recommendations. So I'm comfortable if he's asking me as the CEO to tell him what was the recommendation, what was it based on, and to share the type of information that would have been shared with the board in order to reach the decision that was taken by the board. But it makes me uncomfortable that he seems to want a little bit more information than what ordinarily a chairperson would request. And I indicate that my level of discomfort. And as a result,
You indicated that to him.
yes, I indicated
Yes.
my level of discomfort.
This was still at your first meeting with him, or subsequently?
It would be probably the very next day.
Okay,
Because the
yes.
first day we were just talking generally, and he was happy, I welcome him into the environment, and so forth. Very short, which was probably the next day, this is what is happening, because he wants to know, about this aircraft procurement process. And I indicate, that, look, I'm a little bit uncomfortable. I know what you're saying, but if I share with you, but why would you want to actually get details in terms of documents? And probably it's even documents that even I have not requested, because if I've satisfied myself that the proper processes were followed, that should be adequate in giving a level of comfort. And I did not hand over, the documents that he requested.
By the way, you said that the two of you knew each other before he was appointed as chairperson.
That's correct, Chair.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Because we had both been employed by SAA at some point
Okay.
together
okay.
in the past. But then it doesn't stop there. Then,
So you provided the information you wanted, or you arranged for your team to provide it, or not really?
no, I don't arrange for my team to,
Yeah,
but I give him an
you
update.
give him the information.
Yes, I give him the update, which I think is the correct update to provide him with, but I don't instruct any of my team, neither do I actually hand over any of the documents. But then I establish that he then decides that he will be requesting all of this information that relates to tenders by calling executives directly, which then becomes, hugely problematic for me, because I'm like, okay, now I even have the chairperson behaving badly. It was one thing, to, let's say, push back, on some of the individuals from the ministry. But how am I going to do that with the chairperson who's also now beginning to request information that they shouldn't be requesting, and calling the executives directly, which is bad protocol? I am there. And he should not be doing that and getting involved in operational issues. I do then decide this is not going to work, because essentially, as I'd already indicated, for me it was about waiting to see who's going to get appointed and what the value system would be going forward. So I prepare my resignation letter and I go to see Mr. Kona.
So hang on. Soon after this incident where you hear that he's approaching your executives, You decide that's it. That's
That-
enough?
That's correct, Chair.
Yes.
Because he's not approaching them on asking, what is the performance of SA Technical, for argument's sake? He's actually quite specific about requesting information that pertains to procurement. So this is what makes me very uncomfortable.
Did the information that he was looking for relate only to the aircraft issue? I think, was it a tender or what you were working on, or your SAA was working on, or was it on various procurement issues or tenders?
No, the information that he requests is on various large tenders. The
Oh,
one that
various
he
large
raises
tenders.
with me directly is the one that pertains to the aircraft purchase.
Okay.
But subsequent to that, he's calling people in the technical area because that's also where there is big procurement and wanting to obtain information with regard to procurement processes there, with regard to fuel processes, and so forth. So he's calling people directly. I think he's calling, the cargo people, I recall, as well, the GM of cargo, he gets called, as well to ask about various issues that pertain to procurement. So at that point, I decided, no. Yeah? Now I don't even have a defense mechanism from a board perspective to assist me in pushing back. And I decide I'm going to resign. But I did not just hand in my resignation letter. I met with Mr. Gona, and I did share with him that, look, I had a first meeting with yourself. I did share some of the concerns that I heard, and it is unfortunate because you are behaving in a particular manner, which I find, unacceptable. And as a result of that, I also feel that it is best that I terminate my services with, SAA. He tries to persuade me. No, it's a little bit unfortunate. Maybe you misunderstood, and so forth. But please don't make this decision. I said, no, I've already made the decision, unfortunately. I've thought hard and long, on this decision. So this is it. I'm actually handing in my resignation. And in my resignation, I was obligated to serve a 3-month notice. And I indicate to him that this is what I'm obligated to do, which is to serve a 3-month notice, but I will be guided by him on how long they would want me to stay. But if they would be in a position to release me earlier, I would be more than comfortable to do that. I then receive a call on that same day from Advocate Lindinkosi Thomas, who requests an urgent meeting with me that same evening. And I accept.
Was she a board member at the time? Was she a previous board member?
She was still a board member, one of the three.
One of the three who had remained, okay.
Indeed. So I agreed to meet with her, and I go and meet with her at Chambers, actually. And while I'm there, she wants to try and understand why have I decided to actually resign, and most importantly, why am I resigning with immediate effect? Which catches me by surprise, because I then say, look, I don't understand, because I never said I'm resigning with immediate effect. In my letter, I was very clear that I have a 3-month notice, but if I could be released earlier, of course, I would be grateful, for that, but I definitely did not resign with immediate effect. She then says, well, that's very surprising. And she actually even shows me a round-robin resolution, which has been sent to her by company secretariat, I assume, but this is to appoint Mr. Gona as the executive chair, and which they want the remaining board members to approve. And the motivation for him being appointed as executive chair is because I have resigned with immediate effect, according to the communication or the resolution.
Executive chair would be what in this context? There is a chair of the board, there is a CEO, group CEO. So executive chair would fit in where?
So there isn't or wasn't a position called executive chair, but essentially what he was trying to communicate that with the CEO, the group CEO resigning with immediate effect, somebody needs to step up and also manage the executive functions of the organization. So his recommendation is that he be the individual who is the chairperson but is executive chair, because it then allows him the room to also basically run the operations, run the organization in an executive capacity.
But I take it that that Mr. Kona was a member of the board.
Yes.
But in the structure of SAA, was there a position called executive chair?
There wasn't a position called executive chair, but essentially, maybe let me put it differently, without actually putting a title to it. But what Mr. Kona is requesting is that he be given permission to also assume executive powers.
Which would be CEO powers?
Yes.
Yeah,
To
but
also assume
yeah.
executive powers, which would be CEO powers, because the CEO has decided to resign with immediate effect.
Also, he would remain chair of the board.
Yes.
But also
With the-
effectively be CEO.
That's
or
correct,
Combine the two.
That's correct.
And then you would be called executive chair.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay.
So maybe, for me, what isn't correct is to use the term executive chair, but I'm trying to describe that it's a chairperson.
The actual
who takes-
function, yes,
exactly.
yeah. It was, he wanted to perform the duties of a non-executive chair as well as those of the group CEO together.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay.
And then, just on the point of your resignation, can I ask you to turn to page 205, please? Is that your letter of resignation?
That's my subsequent letter of resignation, which then talks to with immediate effect. But this is not my original resignation letter,
Thank you.
because after the conversation with Advocate Lindy Thomas, where it's clear that the chair wants to assume executive powers, I then draft this second letter to indicate that now that he has decided to assume and request the rest of the board to approve him also taking over executive powers, then indeed I would want to actually exit the system with immediate effect.
So, strictly speaking, this is not your resignation letter,
Yes,
but it's a letter in which you state your position after certain developments since you handed in your resignation.
that's correct, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
And then through you, Chair, that concludes the main focus of the evidence of this witness. However, at page 36 of the bundle, through the position that this witness holds as interim Chief Executive Officer of South African Express, she is able to share with this commission an update on the Northwest ground handling and EML transactions that this commission has been hearing about.
Yes, let's do that. Let's cover that.
I think, Chair, the only thing that I can share with regard to these two issues is that at SA Express, there is a relatively new board. I made mention that I became interim CEO of SA Express in August of last year, post the grounding of SA Express in May. So SA Express gets grounded on the 24th of May, 2018, and this is a day after the new board has been appointed. And so for the first part, or the first few months of their tenure as the new board, it was really just focused on making sure that we would get the airline back into the skies, which is how I originally came in as well as part of the task team to assist with that. once that had been done, it really has, and part of the work that was being done was obviously to look at issues relating to governance and governance breakdowns, one of which related to even issues relating to commercial agreements or uncommercial agreements in terms of the airline. This is where the board's attention was brought in relation to some of the work that had already been undertaken at that point relating to the Northwest grounding agreement and the EML. In fact, to my knowledge, by the time this new board takes over, there is already one case that's lodged against Mr. Brian van Wyk in relation, by SA Express, in relation to the Northwest matter. But this board,
I'm sorry, when you say there was at least one case lodged by SAA against Mr. van Wyk, what
SA
does that
Express.
mean? What kind of case and where was it lodged? Criminal case, disciplinary case, or what?
No, Chair. In relation to Brian van Wyk, I believe that the case had been opened with the Commercial Crimes Unit.
Okay, a
in
criminal
relation-
case, yeah.
Yes, a criminal case with regard to Mr. Brian van Wyk, only. There were other individuals that were on suspension as well in relation to the Northwest matter and also in relation to the EML matter. So the board undertook to complete the investigation that was necessary to conclude on these matters. But I just want to be clear that the focus being on ensuring that action is taken against those individuals that were directly linked, were either employed by SA Express or were former employees of SA Express, and not beyond that. Because as we all know right now, that especially when it pertains to Northwest, that it actually goes beyond even SA Express in its nature. That work at this stage has been completed. The people who were on suspension have subsequently been terminated, or some of them opted to resign at the point at which they were under suspension. But over and above that, with some of the further work that has been done, there have been further cases opened against those former employees as well.
Okay.
And then lastly, it's been brought to my attention that Vuisile Kona is spelled incorrectly at paragraph 96 on page 34. I just wish to place it on record.
Okay.
But
No,
those
that's
are
fine.
certainly the questions from the legal team
Yes.
for this witness.
No, that's fine. I see you haven't talked in terms of names other than Mr. van Wyk. It might be helpful if subsequently maybe supplementary affidavit can be sent through and they would assist, just talks about names. This is what has happened and these are the employees of SA Express who were suspended and when did they resign, those who resigned, and if there were disciplinary hearings, this is what happened in regard to the disciplinary hearings so that the commission has a complete picture.
I'm very happy to provide that, Chair.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. The legal team will be in touch with you for purpose of that supplementary affidavit.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, you are done?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Ms. Mzimela, it's been a long day. Thank you very, very much for coming to share, to give evidence in the commission. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. You are excused.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to say you look like you might be wanting to say something, but or
No, Chair.
it's just a sigh of relief.
Indeed, Chair.
Oh, okay, all right. Thank you. You are excused. Yes, we can adjourn now, and tomorrow we start at 10.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes. We'll adjourn then for today, and tomorrow we'll start at 10. We adjourn.